everybody. Maybe after you could put the phone on mute just for now on your end, and I'll get started. I'm very excited. 100 people in Bogota. This is fantastic. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for celebrating this first World IA Day, and secondly, for inviting me to join you on it. I wish I could be there in person. I think your weather is probably nicer than here in Brooklyn. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and Hector, if you could mute the phone, it would really help, because I'm hearing so much on the other end. So if there's any way you can mute, and then I'll take about 45 minutes to do this presentation. And then I will stick around for a little while for questions and answers. And then I have to go get my daughter, so I can't stay too long. So I'll be talking. I'll be talking about. I'm going to hold on a minute. Okay. Oh, hello, Natalia. I see that you just tweeted. I'm going to wait till you tell me to start. Okay. Okay. I'll go ahead and start now. I feel that it's strange to be talking about better practices for information architecture when so many of us have been doing information architecture for so many years. But there's still so many great opportunities, and there's still a lot of really poorly designed websites and applications that really need the loving touch of a good information architect. So I want to cover 8 better practices that I think the profession really needs to be considering so that we can do better and so that we can start taking advantage of some of these new opportunities to help people. So my name is Lou, and I think you already see my bio. I did co-author the Polar Bear book, Information Architecture for the World Wide Web, in Peter Morville, which is now in its 3rd edition. But I also have a book that came out last summer called Search Analytics for Your Site. So I like people to know that I didn't stop writing after the Polar Bear book. So my URLs are below, and I'd love to hear from you. I'll put my contact information up at the very end. So you may have seen this cartoon before. This is an example of a university website, but it could be true for many, or just about any website. There's the idea of what the organization thinks is its information. And then there's the information that people are actually looking for, and they very rarely seem to intersect. It's a great illustration. And one of the problems is that people are still very unable to answer fundamental questions about their websites, their intranets, and their other information systems. And I'm going to ask you to think about this for your own website. Do you know who your primary audiences are? Could you tell me, if I was sitting in the room next to you, for each audience, what are the 5 major tasks that they want to accomplish or information needs that each might have. And if you know what those are, do you know that you're satisfying those needs? What data support you? Do you have evidence that you're doing a good job? And do you even have an idea of how to measure whether you're doing a good job? These are fundamental questions. They're not easy questions by any means, but they're basic questions that if we're not prepared to answer, or at least begin answering, it's no wonder that our websites are so poor and that information architecture tends to be so poor. But why can't we do this? Why can't we come up with the answers to these questions? And why can't we get findability right? Part of the problem is we do not yet know very well how to diagnose problems. We're still very much caught in a cycle of redesign after redesign after redesign, trying to solve big problems without taking the time to really diagnose and understand what problems we're trying to solve. So we're trying to do big, expensive things, often in many cases, small changes will do the trick. Small changes will solve problems, but we don't do the diagnostics. We don't really find out what problems we really should be solving. We're very poor at measurement. It's very hard to measure findability. And then we're trying to do all this work, especially in settings where, whether it's a large organization or even in many small organizations, there's a decentralized ownership and maintenance of our websites. So you have what we call silos, separate pockets of content that are independent in many cases. And the problem is these things need to be connected and coherent in ways that actually appeal to the end user. So we have our content in silos, but that's not how users see and need information. Our decision makers, the people who pay the bills, are even in worse shape than we are. They know less about this. And so they tend to be very happy when someone, usually a marketing person, offers to solve a problem that they haven't diagnosed. So decision makers hear about really exciting sounding products or technologies, or they hear a great presentation from a web agency or a marketing agency, and it sounds good, but that's not necessarily solving the problems that they really have to deal with in their own organization. And a lot of decision makers are very short-term thinkers. They're only going to be on the job for a few years. So when they try to solve problems of findability, they don't want to make the long-term investments. And then ultimately, one of the problems we all face is that we're semantically illiterate. What our websites are there for us to help us do is to have conversations with customers, with users, back and forth, the dialogue. That's a semantically rich experience that we're very poorly equipped to work with. We just don't know how to do it. It's something that's still very new. It's basic communications. And the skills that organizations have to carry out those communications are dreadfully poor. So I want to suggest 8 better practices to improve the situation, 8 better practices to improve findability. I say better practices and not best practices because we're still working this out. And in our work, there's no such thing as best. There's no such thing as complete. There's no such thing as final. There's only the goal of improvement. There's only the goal of doing better. So I use that word intentionally. I'm going to go through these. How to diagnose better, how to come up with evidence to back your decisions up that is balanced, how to advocate for long-term thinking and against short-term thinking, how to do a better job of measurement, especially around engagement, how to support contextual navigation and better search across silos, how to combine design approaches more effectively, and how to tune your work and tune your design over time. And I think these areas are really the frontier for where the field needs to be going. You know, there's a lot of discussion about cross-channel IA and pervasive IA, and I think that's really important. But these are fundamental areas that if you're not taking care of, you're not really going to be able to do single-channel IA, much less cross-channel. So number one, diagnosing the important problems. This is something called the zip curve. It comes from economics. And it was used in economics to make the point that a few people in any economy control most of the wealth. And everyone else has nothing, or pretty close to nothing. So the same phenomenon is very true for us when we're dealing with information. What I'm showing you here is an example, it's kind of a cute example of the zip curve. It looks like a dragon. It has a short head and a very long tail. And I'm using it to describe the frequency of people's search queries. Now, this doesn't only apply to search queries, but let me use this example first. So what I'm showing you is that a few queries, the very left part, if you took them and, if you took your queries, your search queries for any site, this is pretty much a rule for everyone, and you rank them from most frequent to least frequent. From the left to the right, on the left, most frequent, on the right, least frequent. Few queries are searched a lot, as you can see, in the head. And then they kind of drop down into the tail where you have very esoteric queries that may only be searched once. Now, what's interesting is that not all queries are distributed equally. And it doesn't even work this way. There's not a gradual diminishment. It's not even the 80-20 rule. I'm not sure you call it that in Spanish, but the idea that 20% of whatever, let's say your search queries, accommodates 80% of the traffic. It's even more extreme than that. It's a little bit goes a very long way. Now let me show you that, first of all, that the tail goes a very, very, very long way. The long tail is extremely long in almost every case. Let me show you the same thing in text. This is, again, search queries, in this case, from a university site. And the number one search query was campus map. Out of the tens of thousands of search queries that were issued by users in this time period, campus map was over 7,000 individual searches. That's over 1.4% of all search traffic. One query out of tens of thousands was almost 1.5% of all the search traffic. Now, what if we wanted to look at improving the top 14 queries? That would get us 10% of all the search traffic. So 14 queries gets us over 10% of all the traffic. So we're moving from the short head now toward the tail. If we were interested in studying 20% of all our search traffic, it would only take 42 queries. 30% of all the search traffic, only about 100 queries. And then it starts dropping down. 40% of all of our traffic is handled by 221 unique queries. 500 queries gets us half of all our search traffic. And then we get out into the long tail. This is true for you. It's true just about every site with search there is. And it's great because it means if you want to improve performance, if you want to figure out what problems to solve, you start with the short head. And your investment goes a long way. So this is an issue that I think not enough people keep in mind, that websites are not democracies. And we don't treat everything equally if we want our investments or effort to go a long way. And this is true not just, excuse me, this is true not just for queries, but also for tasks. A few tasks are the things that people really want to be able to achieve on your site, and everything else is pretty secondary. A few ways to navigate are most important. So don't support every possible navigational path. One or two is probably going to accommodate most users. Features, a few features, are all people really want. If you've used a Microsoft Office product, you know what I mean. Every feature seems to have equal weight, and it's hard to find in all those menus the one or two that you want to use regularly. And finally, your documents. A few of your documents are what most people really need from you in terms of content. So worry about those few documents in the short head, and make sure You refresh them, improve them, and so forth, because that's what people need. And I like to spread unfounded rumors. Here's one. Something like 90% of all Microsoft.com content has never once been accessed. Why is it there? Why do they bother spending the time and money to make it available, especially if that cuts into their doing a good job with the content in shorthand? So focus on the stuff that matters, and the zip distribution will really help you with your diagnostics. So here's what you do. Continually prioritize what's important. Here's a very basic process. Define your user groups. Determine what their business requirements are. Your organization and stakeholders can help you do that. Use your user research toolkit to gather user needs. You have to then put those things together, prioritize the few really important needs based on what stakeholders believe and what users express. It makes sense for each user group. Once you've done that, you can make changes to address those few really critical shorthead needs, and then you can see how well you're doing. So here's this in action. Again, with the university site. What we've done here is we've made some choices, some priorities. We said, of all the audiences, all the user types, 3 are what we really care about. And what we did was we learned from talking to stakeholders that for applicants, it's really, the stakeholders really want applicants to be able to find information about visiting the campus and mentoring and successful alumni. Come to the top row. But if you look at the user research, what applicants want is something a little different. Yeah, they want to find the application form, but they also want to be able to find the campus map. And most importantly, parties, social events that involve alcohol. So what your job is to do is to not only do your research to figure that out, but then put those together to come up with a combined list of priorities that are really important. So that's that 4th column, number 1, application form, number 2, brochure, and so forth. And then test. See how hard it is to find an application form. See how hard it is to find a brochure. I'm using letter grades in the last column, and very quickly you see, oh, mentoring is difficult to find, and F is a bad score. Well, let's look at all the ones that got bad scores and fix those. Those are small things to fix. And let's repeat this process regularly, every quarter or maybe every month. And if you do this, you're continually tuning your site's performance and your information architecture along the lines of what users and stakeholders want. Important things to each. And that's a lot less expensive and far more effective than redesigning everything, which is a more typical approach. Okay, that's number 1. The rest will go a little faster. I mentioned making decisions based on evidence. And we are under increasing pressure to do so as information architects. We can't just make up ideas or make up decisions. We actually have to justify why we made our design decisions. So I want to show you a few things that I find very helpful here. This is a diagram by Christian Rohrer. I'm giving the URL below. It's called Landscape of User Research Methods. And what Christian does is he divides a lot of methods that we already are familiar with, many of us, into a map or landscape. And he uses 2 axes. Approach is the approach of qualitative or quantitative approach, and data source. It's the data behavioral that comes from use, or attitudinal that comes from study, where you're actually interviewing users. Where it's more of an artificial type of data gathering approach. And he has mapped the methods out in 4 quadrants. What I'd like you to do is think about the kind of user research you do today and ask yourself if it maps in a balanced, even way among these 4 quadrants. If not, you should start thinking about correcting and balancing your user research techniques so that they do not skew to one of these quadrants. So I find this really valuable, and I really hope you find this useful and take it to heart, because each user research method is like a different lens on a difficult problem, and you really need to use many different lenses to really understand the problem right. You don't want to use the same set of similar lenses to understand a particular problem. Now, the nice thing is when you start looking at these problems, these design challenges from different perspectives, with different people, not just different methods, but different people, you start seeing how complementary and dichotomous those perspectives are. So here's one example that I put together where I'm looking at how web analytics people see challenges and ask questions, and how user experience people address the same questions. So you'll see that when we look at, this is very stereotyped and overgeneralized, but I think it's useful. You see what they analyze. Web analytics people are looking at what is happening. User experience people are trying to understand why those things happen. So when you take analysis of behavior versus analysis of intention and motive and put those together they're more powerful and more useful and lead to true insight. Our methods are also complementary. Quantitative versus qualitative. What we're trying to do, our goals, what we're trying to achieve is complementary. Web analytics people are often more interested in helping the organization meet and measure its goals as expressed as key performance indicator, KPI. But user experience people are often more advocating for users, and they're achieving their own goals. How we use data, web analytics people are often measuring performance with data. User experience people are often looking for surprises and patterns that emerge from the data. So not necessarily measurement for goals, but just looking for new insights. And those fit together quite well as well. What kind of data we use? Statistical data versus descriptive or semantic data. Again, these things are highly complementary. When you put these perspectives together, they're far, far more powerful than if they're separate and siloed. Now, I also suggest you take a perspective of balancing things over time. So not just balanced perspectives and balanced data, but also balanced work. So one of the things I really like to talk about is moving from projects to processes. So you're constantly learning, you're constantly sampling the data that's available to you so that you don't wait 2 or 3 years and suddenly you have to do very large projects that are very expensive and very difficult. But the idea of constant tuning. So as an example, something that we all know and many of us really hate are doing content inventories. And content inventories are pretty stupid when we wait, and then do them all at once, like a snapshot. It's impossible. It's too much. But I now recommend, and I didn't do this in Polar ago, but I now recommend this, rolling or ongoing content inventories. You're constantly sampling content, learning from content, and looking to identify new content. So think about things like content inventory and other work you do, and try to not see those types of work as projects, where it might take 80 hours once every 2 years, but processes where it might take you 2 hours every week forever. And finally, think about developing an ongoing research regimen program, where you might decide every week you're going to do certain things that are balanced. So you might do some behavioral and quantitative work, like analyzing your analytics for new trends, as well as some more qualitative work, like doing some basic task analysis. But then there might be some other things that you do every month and some other things that you do every year or every quarter. And the things that you do most frequently will be the least expensive things for you to do. And of course, the things that may be more infrequent are going to be the most expensive. But now as you start breaking this up into an ongoing program, you start seeing that there are benefits that you can have that are ongoing, things that you do on a regular basis that aren't a lot of work, but you have to continually do them, and that they're worth doing. Okay. I talked about short-term thinking and the need to advocate for long-term thinking. I really like this diagram from Stuart Brand, who spoke as a keynoter at the Information Architecture Summit about 10 years ago. And he says that this case layering really works for a lot of work. In fact, his model starts with inner, more stable layers, things like nature don't really change. We're governed by laws of biology or even physics. And moving to the outer layers, things that change often, like fashion. That it's useful to be conscious of the fact that certain things are far more dynamic or more ephemeral than others. So I think one of the problems that we have is that we're often forced to think about the outer layers and that we do not have the inner layers, the stable layers, to keep us on track. And if you don't have that inner core of stable anchors, if you will, then you're never going to be able to stay true to your mission. So what I'm suggesting that people think about doing, whether they're doing this for their projects or they're doing this for their teams, is to be very clear what mission, vision, charter, goals, key performance indicators, and objectives are. And sometimes we think we know, but then we talk to other people on our team and they have a very different idea. And that can lead to big long-term problems. So this has to be a group exercise. In fact, let me give you an exercise from the Game Storming book by Dave Gray, Sonny Brown, James McAnulfo. Came out a couple years ago by O'Reilly. I love this book because it takes the types of things we do in meetings and makes them more game-like. And one of the ones that I like is what we call, in English, an elevator pitch. Essentially a mission statement that you can give in a few seconds to someone who you might meet them on an elevator and they might ask you, what do you do? And they make it game-like. They I do this with my clients. People actually try to come up with fill in the blanks for target customer, customer need, product need, et cetera, et cetera. And we do this individually and then we do it as a group. And to be able to have an elevator pitch for a web team or an intranet project, it's really valuable. Everyone is on the same page, everyone understands each other, and then you're going to be far less likely to be reactive and find that your project changes under your feet. Okay, measuring engagement. So I've talked about the need to measure more. There's a lot of measurement in our world already, but it's very much geared toward this. Understanding transaction conversions. And so we're all familiar with the conversion funnel. And that's great. There's a lot of other aspects of our websites that don't fit this funnel. So, what about all the other types of navigation? What about cross promotion? What about orientation? What about finding? All the things that happen long before a user is ready to move into the mode of transaction. We don't have these measurements in place yet. And yet, they're just outside the grasp. They're just beyond our fingertips. I want to get you thinking a little bit about how you might measure things like orientation, like engagement, like cross-promotion, like authority. We are the ones that have to do this because we're the ones that are responsible for all the things that happen before that funnel, all the things that come up before and connect those funnels. So I found the gradual engagement model to be really valuable. Luke Grabowski wrote about it in his book, Web-Form Design. And I've given you a URL at the bottom of this slide to learn more. And I was working with a Fortune 50 company here in the States that was doing e-commerce. And I found that, well, they were doing e-commerce, and the site was primarily a catalog. But they wanted to launch all types of new features that were not simply about buying the product, but about how to use product, how to profile your home, because it was home product, different different rooms in your home. A lot of rich features, but they did not know where and when to introduce those features. So I came up with a very simple, what I call an onion layer model, based on conversation. And layer 0, before the user has really done anything, they just visited the site, all they've done is arrive at the main page. They haven't authenticated, there's no cookies yet, really nothing. There's no conversation that's happening yet, but a conversational approach to understanding gradual engagement. Let's take that a little further. So layer 1, as we get closer to the center, the user asks a question. So they might do a search, for example. Now the user is going to be more willing to, based on our response, give them information, going to be willing to go deeper. They trust us more each movement from one layer to the next, because we're offering them value from one layer to the next. So initially, the user just visits. Layer 1, they ask the site a question. At layer 2, the site might ask the user a question, because now they have more trust between each other. Like, would you like to save this product to a wish list? At layer 3, now the site might suggest something to the user. And then at layer 4, before the site may act on the user's behalf without even notifying the user, because they have that level of trust in place now. Now, with each movement from one layer to the next, we can measure. In a way, this is kind of like a funnel, only for engagement. So when we start breaking interactions down in smaller but meaningful pieces, we start to uncover new metrics. And this is just one way to do it. There are many other interesting, small, but really useful metrics that I want to encourage you to start thinking about to really press beyond transaction conversions. Now, I'm going to some more tactical areas in the next two ideas. One is better support for contextual navigation. And one of the things that drives me crazy about a lot of people that don't understand information architecture see it is they think all information architecture is site hierarchy, where users navigate from the top down. That's probably one of three major areas and the least important. The other two areas are search and contextual navigation, where people are navigating deep content, often horizontally, rather than up and down a hierarchy. Now, one of the things we're really bad at doing is figuring out what types of contextual navigation to support. You think about maybe having something called related links, but related is a meaningless term. There's nothing to really help us or help our users understand what is related and what's not. And in other cases, we simply provide nothing. So either we're giving too many strange, not useful related links, or we're giving no related links. And what I really want to encourage you to do is to start trying to identify desire lines between pieces of your site's deep content. So a desire line is essentially, it's like the kind of path that you might see in a park or on a plaza where it's grass, and where there may be paved path, but you also notice that people are making their own paths, like this one, worn into the dirt, and there's no grass anymore. that's a line that the planner of that park or plaza did not think about. We need to figure out the same paths for deep content. And there's a couple ways to do that. One is content modeling, and the other is site search analytics. Let me talk a little bit about those. One of the things I'm finding really useful, and we were at the IA Summit last year, was very exciting for people, is the idea of typing the content objects. In other words, to figure out what are your common building blocks by type. We call these content objects. And I'm giving you examples here from the BBC. And they have families of content types that are made up of things like for music, album pages, artist description, album reviews, things that fit together, or that should fit together but hadn't quite fit together. And what we really want to do is support people who find themselves deep in content like this and make it easy for them to move that content without relying on a hierarchy. And we also not only want to establish those desire lines between the deep content, but we also want to figure out what's missing. So kind of the work that I've been finding really useful with clients is to identify a pocket of content where there are consistent content objects, and there are many of them, maybe thousands of them. And what I do is something like card sorting, but instead I use actual content, and I have people take sample content, I give them tasks, and I have them draw their paths, usually by take their content that I printed out on a whiteboard, drawing with a marker lines between those content objects. And I look for patterns, and I have them think out loud. And finally, we start getting diagrams that look like this, based on many different users' results from different user studies. And we start seeing that there are content objects that are good starting points, and that there are certain objects that should link to other objects, and that there are content objects that we may not have thought of before. And once we have an idea of what our content objects are and how they fit together, we can build that into our content management systems. This is really what our content management systems are there for, but aren't usually being used for. So the idea of actually using your content management systems not only to manage the right types of objects, but to manage the links between them. The links are often made, as you know, by metadata. There's a logic that says, for example, for an album page to link to an album review, you need to have common metadata, like they both need to have the same album name and the same artist name. Those are two types of metadata. The nice aspect of this work is when you start looking at what types of metadata attributes you may need to link content, you'll see in the right-hand column that there are certain metadata attributes that come up again and again. Okay, album name and artist name are going to be really important for us to automate links between content objects. We can do that if we can just create those metadata attributes or make sure they're usable. That will really help us in terms of developing and supporting content models. So you just did a lot of work on certain types of deep content, and now not only are we prioritizing our deep content, we're prioritizing which metadata attributes we should care about investing in to support navigation across our deep content. So there's a bit of prioritization that's going on here. In a way, it's sort of like the short head of your deep content and of your metadata. We're prioritizing what's important. So your work to do is to think about this exercise of content modeling where you're allowing people to work with actual deep content objects and to essentially create mini navigation architectures out of that deep content and figure out how to automate the support of those content models using your CMS and metadata. So I like Mike Appleton's presentation that was made at the last day. He talked a lot about what they do at BBC. I also
And I think you the link here. Oh, this presentation is actually up in SlideShare, and Edgar, please make sure I provide the URL at some point before I get off the phone if people want to access this. I also, actually I should mention site search analytics. Going back to here, also start looking at the kind of searches that originate at these different content objects. So that's another way to establish desire lines. If you see that when people are at certain things like an album page, you can study what they search from that type of content object, and because the searches may indicate a link, a navigation path that you are not providing but should. So I just wanted to mention the role of site search analytics here as well. Okay, moving on. I want to talk a little bit about improving search. I'm a big fan of making initial search very simple. And when users have already been exposed to search results, that's the time to start introducing contextualized advanced search features. Rather than having something called advanced search, which is a ghetto of miscellaneous search features, why not introduce those features when they make sense? I don't really like this example that much, but in the case of ask.com, they're actually giving you a lot of different features, like ways to narrow your search and ways to expand your search in the context of the search results. And you can actually take advantage of site search analytics when you're studying what people search on your site, and and look for patterns. So, for example, you might look at search sessions and look for patterns that might tell you that, oh, in many cases, people are narrowing their searches. So they might start by searching for something like solar energy, and then follow it up by a narrow version of that search, like how solar energy works. You might find a pattern in search sessions. People are expanding or broadening their searches. You might find that they're looking for charts or images. You might find that they're looking for definitions or explanations. You might find that they're looking for things like news. Here's examples where the data should ultimately support which of all these various advanced features you should be surfacing. And when you introduce these features, when they make sense, they will get used. And that's when your search engine investment actually starts delivering value. Other really basic things that I still don't see very much of are teaching your search engine to recognize and better handle specialized queries, like commerce sites that not only allow for keyword searching, as the LLB one does, but item number, product ID. That's a really big one, because sometimes people have things like ISBN numbers or product ID numbers, and it's useful to actually support that type of search. And you'll see search analytics when that's the case, because the data suggests and teaches you what kinds of special search is actually searching. The FT.com Financial Times example, here we're looking at another type of search pattern. You might find in the search data that people are often entering things like queries, like regulations and date information. If you're often entering date information, why not support date filtering? Or if you see that often entering things like a topic and a name, can your search tool help you extract names of people to help them filter that way, or names of companies, or whatever it might be? These are not especially advanced features, but they're useful features that you should be turning on because the evidence in your search analytics suggests that the features would be useful. Finally, specializing your search results can also be valuable. I mentioned content modeling earlier. Here's a really great example of making search results better by relying on content models. So here at Hewlett-Packard, search engine knows that when a user searches for a numeric string, that there's a good chance that it's for a product. Oh, the search engine says, oh, they are searching for 1012. We actually have a product, the 1012 printer. And then it shows these specialized search results that are essentially content objects from the content model for products. So product overview, supplies, options, and accessories, etc. Now look at how much better those search results are than the horrible algorithmic automated search results that the search engine ordinarily would retrieve. There's no comparison. And what's interesting here is they've already been able to tune this approach. When Hewlett-Packard first tried this approach, the special content objects that they were showing were all about product comparisons and pricing and other content objects that would help you make a purchase as if you were a new customer. But the data eventually showed them that really the people searching for products were existing customers who needed to do things like troubleshooting and downloading drivers. And so they changed the way they showed these content objects, these quick links, in response to that. So trying something like this gives you an island around which new data will gather, and Hewlett-Packard has changed what they show in response to the kind of data they gathered after the launch. So it's important to keep tuning. All right, so here's what you should do. You should buy my book to learn a little bit more about site search analytics and especially session analysis. I apologize for making a push to sell my book. Two more, a little more quickly. Defining design approaches effectively is something that I don't think gets enough attention in the information architecture community. The idea that we can combine both broad, shallow approaches to our information and narrow, deep approaches is very interesting and doesn't get a lot of attention. So let me give you an example. Here's a financial services site in the US called Vanguard. And they have all the kind of basic ways to learn about their information and the products. But then they have this thing called What We Offer. And it's narrow, deep content to balance the broad, shallow types of access like search. So for example, it's US, we have to do our taxes our taxes are due on April 15th. And we have to go to sites like this for investors to get information. And it's often the night of April 14th when we're very tired and impatient. And if we had done a search on the site for tax information, you'd have gotten thousands of results. But if they've been here that said, okay, what we want to give users is a few really useful results on a few really useful topics. This is the short head stuff, things like tax center and personal services and college savings. Let's look at the tax center. It's a simple page, a handful of links from different silos that are the few things that a person really cares about when they're trying to finish completing their tax information so they can pay their taxes. This is what you need the night before your taxes are due, not a search that gives you everything that has to do anything with taxes. So I call these guides, the polar bear book, you might call them landing pages, it doesn't really matter. The idea is that this is a manually created page with editorial effort invested into selecting few really useful results. Guides are one way. Best bets are similar to guides, only in search results. So the idea of having someone do a common search and getting, like malignant melanoma, and getting a best bet search result. So if you look at this, what someone has done is they said, all right, malignant melanoma is a common search. Let's make sure we have a really good result. Let's give them the melanoma homepage, and let's give them another best bet or recommended link for melanoma in children. Then look at the bottom. 957 results around malignant melanoma. That may be more than we want. And look at the first one. It's unusable. The search engine doesn't know any better. So for common searches, Why not be using best bets? This is a really nice combination of manual editorial effort and robots like search engines. Okay, so here's your to-do. Treat your content like an onion. The stuff in the middle of the onion matters the most. It deserves most of your efforts, especially your expensive manual editorial effort. The stuff at the outer layers, the least important stuff, deserves the least investment. So, if you're working on information architecture, the outer layer, maybe you only make sure it's indexed by a search engine. But then, maybe the next best layer of content is identified simply because users have been allowed to tag it. Of that, the next best layer of content, moving to the inside of the onion, is stuff that might have been tagged by expert taggers, metadata specialists, that were not topical tags, because non-topical tags are less expensive to apply and maintain than topical tags, which may be at the next layer in. At the middle layer, maybe you invest more effort and you do the kind of content modeling I was talking about earlier. And similarly, if you're working in usability, you might not do very much about usability problems in the outer layer, but for the innermost layer, you might do extensive usability work, including things like A/B testing. If you're a content strategist, the outer stuff may not get visited at all. Then, as you move to the better content, the more important content in the short head, you might refresh it annually, monthly, you might spend special attention with titling, and then finally, you might use special schema for structuring your most important content. And this is cumulative. As you move from outer layers to inner layers, you're adding, not replacing, but you're simply doing more and more and more. Finally, I made this point a few times, and I'll make it one last time, about designing, tuning your design over time, continual improvement. Your site is a moving target built on moving targets. All these variables are constantly changing, and thereby your users, you can't know them unless you're constantly studying them. Your content is always changing. Even if it's very good today, it will be stale and old in a month, even if you don't touch it. And your organization is always changing. So your information architecture is a moving target of moving targets. It's changing because it's built on things that themselves are constantly changing. So we see this in the data. What I'm showing you is common search queries month by month from the Michigan State University website. And you'll see we've color-coded them. In September, people are very interested in the yellow stuff. They're always interested in the yellow stuff. Those are courseware systems, information about the use for learning. But look at gray, football. The football team. That's when football season starts in the United States in September. And I guess their football team continued to do well in October. But by November, they dropped down because they're a very bad football team. The campus map is very important in September and January because that's the beginning of the semester. And calendar is important at that time. Bookstores are often important in the beginning of the semester. You can see there are certain patterns that change. In December, when people are taking their examinations, the library suddenly is very important. If we study this ongoing change, we can tune our designs in an ongoing, cyclical way. And it's not that hard to do. You have to make the effort to do so. Our Internal Revenue Service, the people who take our taxes, know this. So for tax day, the main page is already telling us about the deadline for filing our taxes and our last minute tips. If you need more time to file, what you should do immediately after tax day, it's very different. And they're telling us it's never too early to get organized. So changing your content seasonally constitutes to respond to what your users need, because your users' needs change all the time. So again, your to-do is start at work, not a project. process. So those are my 8. This is about 8. I won't reiterate them here. I've gone a few minutes over, but my main point is it's not only do a few really important things that go a long way, and you'll see performance just skyrocketing, and you'll be a hero, and your future will be golden, and everyone will be happy. Only take my advice. So I'll leave it at that. And I think I'll unmute my line and see if there are some questions. I'm going to also put it back on in Skype, or actually I'll put it here in Google. And Edgar, if you have questions that maybe you can type in from people there, it might be easier. I may not be able to do here, but let's see if I can. Okay, ready for questions. There are a bunch of people in a language that is not my own, so you'll have to type the questions extra.
¿Sonido? Bueno, gracias a la intervención de Lois. Bueno, él nos pide que si vamos a hacer preguntas, por favor las realicemos, las vamos a hacer a través del chat, así que es más fácil con la traducción. Entonces, si tienen alguna pregunta, por favor, hagamos unas 2 o 3 preguntas. Natalia.
No sé si entendí mal, pero él dice que hay que es mejor hacer como cambios en la arquitectura paulatinos, que sean flexibles. Entonces confirmar hasta qué momento o si los cambios que se hacen en la arquitectura de información tienen un final o siempre son cíclicos. No sé si es claro.
Ya le estamos viendo Lois.
O si es mejor.
Ya vamos a terminar. Estas conferencias las vamos a publicar la próxima semana para que ustedes tengan la opción de tenerlas disponibles.
Claro, porque la pregunta, no sé si la entendió bien, pero es decir, si yo hago cambios, mejora la arquitectura, el usuario, o sea, ¿cada cuánto debería hacer esos cambios para que la experiencia del usuario no se vea afectada? Porque estamos, por ejemplo, en el caso de Facebook o Twitter, que cambian un diseño de la interfaz en unos periodos muy cíclicos y el usuario se está adaptando aunque estuviera mal. No sé si es claro.
I'm here. I'm just waiting to see the question. I don't see it yet. Yeah, still don't see anything. Okay, I'm not sure that I understand the question about changes to users, but what I'm advocating is
is that we are constantly studying users, and in order to constantly make sure that our sites, information architectures are helping users get what they want from us. So, you know, conversations are always changing. You know, our users are not the same and all the time, and they have different needs from us at different times in history as well as different times in the year. So you can't assume that you know who your users are and what their needs are if you only study that one time. It has to be something you do on a regular basis. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand the question.
Bueno, Leonardo ahorita nos va a comentar la pregunta en español y la respuesta que le di, ¿no?
Well, I don't know if it needs to be any different in South America, but I really believe that you need to be evaluating your information architecture at least every quarter, if not every month. It depends on your resources. If you're a large organization that has someone dedicated to this work, it's different than if you're a small company with one person doing everything related to the website and then some. So, but as often as possible is my answer.
Pues básicamente en relación a la respuesta, él dice que los cambios deben hacerse en ciertos elementos tan regulares como sea posible. No sé si básicamente que los cambios deben hacerse de una manera regular, muy regular. Bueno, cabe notar que existe una diferencia entre la forma de percibir los medios que se tienen en los Estados Unidos y de cómo es la adaptabilidad en relación a las tecnologías y la familiaridad con las tecnologías que no se puede tener en ese contexto. Y pues en relación a la pregunta es eso, que la conveniencia, yo básicamente pregunté, ¿qué tan conveniente consiste, qué tan conveniente es realizar estos cambios? Es básicamente aprender la pregunta la que estabas haciendo y formulando de una manera efectiva. Debido a los cambios que existen o que han existido dentro de las arquitecturas que estamos viendo globalmente, de cómo se han visto y cómo han surgido y qué tan conveniente o tan bueno puede ser en relación a